Today's episode is about the digital dopamine dilemma, from booze to bites and how society has traded bar stools for scrolling. And we're going to look to see if there's any link between the fact that in the mid 20th century, 50% of all Americans smoked. And this kind of peaked in the 1980s. The average person spends 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media, and over 210 million people say that they are addicted to social media. And we've seen that there's been a huge drop in smoking and drinking since the 1980s. What do you think about this topic?
I guess people always have something that satisfies that like dopaminergic rush, and maybe this is it. We don't need to get drunk every night, so let's scroll through Facebook for 2.5 hours instead of going to the bar. It is something that is highly addictive, and really there's very little benefit from actually spending time on Twitter or Facebook or anything else. Sometimes you can learn something, but very rarely. And it's really easy. You can just go, oh, I'll just have a quick look on Twitter. And 20 minutes later, you're still there. And in that time, you've been angry. You've been slightly aroused by a picture of some hot woman. You've laughed at some ridiculous meme. And it's like this whole emotional roller coaster, which I think is, maybe in some ways you could liken it to going out and drinking somewhere, but just in a very different way, in a really antisocial way, because you're not really interacting properly with human beings.
I think if we take, or certainly we can check if your experience is the same as mine, but if you look globally, it seems like the younger generation to us are less into their drinking, less into their smoking. The teenagers and people in their early 20s now tend to live quite clean. And if you look at another figure around this, so obviously I said earlier that the average user spends 2 hours and 31 minutes on social media. For teenagers at the moment, which will be Gen Alpha and the end of Gen Z, it's 7+ hours of daily screen time when they're not in school.
Yeah. So which is it's insane.
And so the key question to that is it just that they're now less cool because they spend so much time on social media that they don't want to go out and get smashed and smoke with their friends like we did, right? Or is it that there's already that dopamine in their system to a level where the point of drinking and smoking is not the same? Is it that the government have decided, or the control systems of the world have decided, that people have enough dopamine, so now we can save money on healthcare and stop everyone smoking and drinking?
It could be a whole host of different things. I mean, whether it's kind of government conspiracy or not, it is handy if you have a dumbed down population, because you can tell them what to think, you can tell them what to do, you can tell them how to behave. Because if everyone's just reading books, listening to lectures, thinking critically, there might be some opposition to what the government was doing. So maybe it could be, it sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but with a lot of conspiracy theories, you go, okay, this, and this happened. Wow, that's really handy for this group of people. So you can see why people would think that way.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that's an interesting perspective from certainly us living in a different country where things are a lot cheaper, and maybe there is a different level of social development. So people are still living in quite poor situations. And here, a hell of a lot more people do still drink and smoke, more than what we see back in the West now. But curiously, the kids here and the younger people don't seem to drink or smoke very much at all either. So there's a definite link across that sort of age group. And I wonder if it is because they've seen more education of people dying, adverts and all of these things that are telling them not to smoke, or what. But the thing that makes me doubt that is, as someone who has been a smoker for most of my life and only recently not been a smoker, all of those health adverts and people dying and people coughing their lungs up and squeezing fat out of their arteries that governments spend multi billions of dollars on showing us every single year. We always saw as kids growing up in the 90s and noughties. But yet, none of those things ever had an effect of making me want to stop smoking. And in fact, the only reason I stopped smoking and now drink less was a result of reading The Easy Way to Stop Smoking book, which actively encourages you to smoke while you read it. And basically, it talks about how the government makes, in the UK, I think alone, like $8 billion a year from the tobacco industry. So it's curious as to why this move is happening, and brings the question of, was it ever about social control, or is it just that now there's a new way to monetize and make money out of people's dopamine addictions?
Yeah, maybe social media is more lucrative in some ways. I mean, yeah, same. It's like ever since, I smoked every day for about 20 something years. And in that time, every packet says smoking kills or smoking causes this. And so the education was always there. Even I remember at like primary school being told of like how bad smoking is and not to do it. Still did it, and it wasn't a deterrent. So yeah, it is interesting how like something else has just taken over and made kids not want to do it. At the same time, things like vapes are getting really, really popular. So it's almost like that's a sort of alternative. One thing that I wanted to throw in there is when we're talking about cigarettes and alcohol, cigarettes have a warning on the side of them. Alcohol, there's medical guidelines saying don't drink more than this every week or something like that. And it has warnings on the labels as well. There's no warnings with social media. It's literally just have at it and go. There's no guidelines saying, well, the government recommends 1 hour max. It's like, just go for it. Every spare minute, be on it. It's a similar kind of thing because you're getting that hit of like dopamine from people liking your post or something like that. And also it's a little bit as well, like just with some of the social media thing, I would liken it to sitting on your own with like a bottle of whiskey or something, just getting hammered, watching TV and just putting you into that like zombo kind of way.
Yeah. And I think to add to that point, platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, all of them, they employ algorithms that manipulate our dopamine reward system, which maximizes that time that we're spending on there. And the thing with that is it gets progressively better or worse in any direction. So recently I've been looking a lot more into like things in terms of law of attraction, manifestation, and all of these kind of self-development areas. So now when I go on YouTube, it's more and more videos down this track and down this area. And it does try to give me some that are just ridiculous. But the point is, it's giving me more of that. Yeah, right. The point is, it's giving me more and more of that kind of content. But if I open my TikTok, for example, it's just Asian girls dancing. And that's because that algorithm has progressively got worse based on what videos I've hovered over. Probably quite a heavy insight 11 minutes into our first podcast, but I'm sure many people can resonate, not just those of us living out in Southeast Asia. So
for sure.
Yeah, so you can push it both ways, and it's almost becomes like a fractal in a social media direction. And if it's going well, then it's going well. But you can have different platforms that are all going in a slightly different direction based on what you consume.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's like, I could say, oh yeah, I spend loads of time on YouTube. I love it. If anyone else went on my feed, they'd just look at it and go like, what the hell is all this crap? But that's the brilliant thing with it. It's completely tailored to the individual. And you don't really get that with other things like drugs or alcohol. It's never that specific. Yeah, you can get slightly different effects from different kinds of alcohol, but it's either you're drinking and you're getting drunk or you're not.
It's speed to hammered.
Yeah.
Is the difference, you know? And I think maybe it's on the side of it, just an idea that comes to mind is that because people are watching a lot more social media and a lot more content on social media, And a lot of that content is of beautiful people, right? So dudes
Hmm.
with big muscles, girls like that are really attractive, like all of these things that are showing people living their best lives. Does that then in a way encourage people not to drink, not to smoke, because they're seeing this vision of people? So is it maybe even a slight positive benefit of having all of this stuff available? Because
If you're a guy in your 20s and you go on social media and all the guys that you see are like jacked, then it might inspire you to go to the gym because you feel bad. However, the likelihood is it's more likely to make you feel depressed. Something happened around 2012, and from there, the rates of anxiety and hospital admissions for things like self-harm, as well as suicide and depression, all of these rates in adolescents and young people are just through the roof. And it seems to tie in with when things like Facebook came in and the whole social media thing just took off. And then when everyone had a smartphone, so you were never away from it. So there could be some plus points to it, but it seems odd that this huge rise in these things seems to go hand in hand with the rollout of social media,
yeah,
and especially among girls.
in terms of the rates of depression and whatnot.
Just
Uh,
huge, like, self-esteem kind of thing. And I mean, not just that as well. I mean, I guess with young people, you got to think when we were at school, if there was like a bully or someone like that, or you were being bullied at school, it was horrible being at school for that time. But you went home and it was gone. Now, if you're part on social media and you're a kid being bullied, you'll get bullied in school and out of school.
They're well prepared. So they're ready to kick into any of that child level bullying. My psychology of bullying is so much stronger. So they're
Right.
already
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
super prepared, like they're like superheroes of being bullied before they even get to school. Yeah, this is it. So another interesting point is as we move into this modern sort of, well, modern's kind of the wrong word because we've been modern for a very long time, but I guess we're going through like a transformation in terms of technology at the moment with
Mhm.
AI, with social media, and with all of these things, even in terms to, you know, are we getting close to being humanoids or whatever? And a stat that came out about all of social media, and I guess drinking used to give people that opportunity to feel free, and smoking did too. But now 70% of adults report feeling controlled by their phones. And I want to add something to that because it gives this illusion of freedom in the digital age. But when is the last time you went for a shit and you didn't take your phone with you?
I'll never take my phone with me into the bathroom.
Oh, wow. So I really do have a problem.
Well, it's one reason why, like, phones in general are considered really, really dirty because people, like, the amount of bacteria that's on most people's phones because they've been like taking a shit, scrolling through Twitter, swearing. But you got a lot of different substances on there.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the things that I was joking about, saying that I will give clients the insight that they should start going for contemplation craps, which is where you, for a period of time, start leaving your phone outside of the bathroom. So I think you might be one of the gurus on this at this stage, Adam, because I'm not sure there's that many that I can see that $37 they get a video. If there's an upsell for $97 if they want to watch your personalized video, full
What's
course
in it?
$497.
Lifetime membership.
Yeah, it's crazy. So just going back to another statistic about the addiction and the side of things with social media. So back in 2018, so we must be in a more sophisticated place with these algorithms now. Facebook actually admitted that its product was designed to create compulsive use.
Yeah, but that completely doesn't surprise me. And they have the word for it, which is engagement. And it's not engagement, it's addiction. Addiction is a better word for it. While they have this clever way of snaring you in there and just stealing your data and trying to sell you stuff. And that's all it is.
Yeah, I have to say that I've always had a bit of an alcohol engagement problem. My engagement levels of alcohol are fairly high. I've seen a recent dip in engagement, but I'm sure
Right, okay.
over certain festive periods that may or may not be coming up, depending on when this is published, they'll be finished by then.
And if not, you'll just create a festive reason.
We've got Lunar New Year coming up, and I think this
Yeah.
is some other things. I like to
Oh, it's
celebrate.
Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesdays are really important. So I think engagement is just a clever way of putting that word, which brings us to another question we wanted to answer today. So is social media more or less harmful than traditional vices? Alcohol, drugs, prostitutes.
I don't know what metrics you would use to measure it, because could it be physically harmful? In what way would you?
Let's go through them, right? So deaths, okay? So deaths caused in a year by smoking and drinking. I think more people are killed by smoking than anything else on the planet in pretty much a year. At last count, it was 8 million people annually were killed by smoking. And it is a ridiculous thing that doesn't actually help you in any way, shape, or form. It slowly gets you addicted to something that then just makes you feel normal and progressively makes you feel less normal over time. So, yeah. And also the media are partly responsible for that as well, I would argue, because we always see it, don't we? If there's some guy and he's like, he's in a plane and the plane's going down and he knows it's done, he always lights up a cigarette. And he's flying down towards his death, and he's like,
it's all right now. I can just accept it.
Into a mangled wreck of death. Right?
Yeah.
So,
and historically, all the cool people in movies smoked in the past.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, when we were kids, it was kind of like adverts for smoking were everywhere. Even on TV, you had like adverts like, "Oh, happiness is a cigar called Hamlet," and things like that. And it was on like race cars in F1 and all.
If you think Ferrari and Michael Schumacher, Marlboro comes to your mind, right? It's just completely. An instant link to that. And I even think that the anti-smoking adverts that were done were deliberate to make people think about smoking more, to be honest with you. And I guess the problem with that kind of addiction is, as you know, when you're a teenager and you first light cigarettes, it makes you feel like shit. It tastes like shit. It makes you cough.
Yeah, it's like
it makes your head rush. Yeah. So at the age you're at where you're trying to be encouraged not to smoke by these adverts that are telling you about cancer, there is no way in your mind you can make that link because you don't enjoy it, it's horrible, and you think, I'll never get addicted to this. There's no way I'll ever be hooked to this because it's fucking rank.
The next thing you know, it's like 30 years later, hooked up to a ventilator.
Yeah, and actually nicotine is not a very addictive drug. Well, it's highly addictive, but the withdrawals to it are very, very mild. So a lot of it is the brainwashing and the media is the point I'm trying to get to. So I think
nicotine itself has some real benefits to it in terms of cognitive ability, even delaying things like Alzheimer's in later life, which is quite interesting. But the issue is with it, it's all the delivery mechanisms bad for you, or seemingly so. So smoking, we know, vaping, it's not been around long enough for us to know completely, but we know there's endocrine disruptors, for other problems it can cause with your lungs, blood pressure, all kinds of things like that. Plus, you now have something that tastes like sweets. It tastes dead nice and it's really high nicotine. And then anything else, it's like the delivery system isn't there.
Yeah, so we know smoking kills more than anything. So in terms of like physical deaths, hands down, the old vices are worse. I mean, even if you add in alcohol, there's got to be quite a lot of deaths related to alcohol, not just the drinking of it, but the stupid shit that people do when they're on it. And then, you know, prostitution is a third, but definitely kills more people than social media, I would suggest, right? So there's on that score, I think we're totally there. Mm-hmm. But then what if we dig into like you were talking about in terms of the rates of suicide, right? Like, so the old vices would not make you go and kill yourself necessarily, but maybe alcohol would. Social media might push you to that point where you feel isolated. And I also think there's a deeper part of it in terms of quality of life and human relationships, because Gen Z, for example, now they did a study and they said that face to face interaction is less important than online communication. Now, I
Yeah.
don't know about you, but I believe there is something about being in the presence of other people. And when people talk about their mind, then your mind is not something that's inside your brain. It's the thing that is interacting with everything else around you, right?
Yeah, it's
And when
almost like
you
it operates outside of your body.
it's a field, right? So when me and you are in the same room having a conversation, our mind fields, one mind field bouncing back and forward off each other. And the same if you imagine someone having an argument. Their fields are there together having this argument and it's rattling back against each other and it feels uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think there's a huge learning about other people and other cultures, other belief structures, other sexualities, whatever, by meeting people that believe those things that you don't and having a
Mhm.
conversation face to face.
Because also as well, that thing of having conversations with people that are different from you, whereas the social media thing will do two things. It will either put you into a group with a lot of like-minded people and treat you the same as them and show you the same content and the same friend suggestions and all that kind of thing. Or it will give you like the extreme opposite, like the complete opposite that's going to make you angry. So it's kind of like, oh, I don't know, say if, say if you kind of like on the left or something like that, occasionally you'll throw you some like neo-Nazi kind of extreme thing just to make you angry. And you're not really gonna interact with that. It's different to if you just meet someone in the bar while you sat chilling. Oh yeah, blah, 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 just get talking about stuff, and it's like you're getting that outside perspective and meeting people that are into different things, and they might explain why and how they think about things.
So what you're saying is even if you're in a bar and you meet a neo-Nazi, he might
Mhm.
still make a good Sunday lunch and be a reasonable human to his family, for example. But I get what you're saying. Like, I grew up in Lincolnshire, which for those of you that are not from the UK and listening to this, Lincolnshire is the second biggest county in the country, but it's one of the lowest populations. So it's right out on the East
Mm.
Coast. It's famous for farming. So there wasn't a great deal of diversity, whether that be racially, culturally, sexually, belief structure wise. There was a lot of diversity with, is John Deere tractors better than Massey Ferguson tractors? And my combine
Right.
harvester's better than your combine harvester. But there wasn't a great deal of diversity other than that, even in the demographics of the people that lived out there. It was a massively conservative area. It's always will be Tory because it's farmers, right? So growing up there, I remember I had certain beliefs and ideas about other people that as soon as I then went to university in Nottingham, which is a very multicultural place and multi-sexual and multi whatever, I started to get a lot more perspectives from different people. And I started to meet people of different cultures, different races, different sexuality, and obviously get on with these people. And I was like, shit.
Yeah,
Right?
it's really interesting. So I'm from like a small town in the northeast of England, and yeah, it's not very diverse there in any way, or it wasn't at the time when I left there. And so yeah, I went to Nottingham, and it's like, oh right, met so many different people from different backgrounds with different ideas from different walks of life, and yeah, it was really interesting.
And I think one of the things that concerns me about where we're at now is had I have grown up in that situation today, my access to other people, even in Lincolnshire, was just through social media. And then I moved to study and maybe still was mostly doing my interaction through social media, linked back to us saying Gen Z prefer that method of contact, would I then have ever had that different perspective? And had I have been given that different perspective, would it have made any difference to me? Because I would then be walls of, oh no, this is someone else's opinion I don't get. And I'm not in the face-to-face
Yeah, yeah.
conversation with them. And I'm wondering if this is what we're now seeing in the UK with this huge rise in 18 to 24-year-olds that are wanting Nigel Farage to be the next prime minister, because they've got themselves into this subset. Now, it's probably a topic for another podcast, and we'll definitely get into some of these things, but whether you like the guy or not, right? There's a real split between women between 18 and 24 who would never, ever vote for reform and these kind of 60-year-old male white politicians, and then a ton of 18 to 24-year-old boys that would, and are actually becoming one of the biggest supporters of that group.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things there. One, I would say, and I think it's the same with Trump as well, people like Trump or Nigel Farage, whether you truly believe what they say or not, they're one of the few politicians, those two, in recent years where you absolutely know what they stand for. And it's like, I pretty much know if you ask Nigel Farage a question about most things, I know how he's going to answer. And it's like, nothing else in politics is like that anymore. It's like this kind of weird trying to like half please everybody, say different things, or say one thing, do another. And everyone's just a little bit sick of it. So I think that goes in some ways why people start supporting people like Nigel Farage or Trump or whatever, just because it seems like a real person. Even though there might be a little bit of dodginess there, who knows? But it's like, oh yeah, I know this person actually thinks something, and he stands for this, and he's going to do it. Whereas no other politicians seem to be doing that, and people need something to believe in, and someone to give them like a little bit of hope as well that they think something similar to the way you do about a situation, and they're going to do something about it.
Yeah, and I suppose we're living in a world now where there's such a lack of authenticity on most fronts, but particularly on a political spectrum, that if somebody comes through with authenticity and they're the only one who's being authentic, no matter what they believe, then they are going to attract people to them. The same way that what must have happened in Germany in the 40s, right? Or the 30s, because of that. Now, obviously, it was abhorrent and it was wrong. And, that, we're not saying that these things should be supported in any way, but it's like people being attracted to someone who's very clear and very purposeful about what it is that they want. Now, if we link that back to today's social media, I believe these guys are actually using it to be relatable, like appearing on Joe Rogan, like doing all of this stuff. But I also think the same is true in the other direction, because everybody can have an opinion that is viewable by a lot of people. Even people going on saying all the bad stuff about Trump and all the bad stuff about Farage makes them more likely to get in power, because they're always being talked about. And if you go back to even Oscar Wilde, right? All publicity is good publicity, I believe, is an Oscar Wilde quote. And it means as long as they're talking about you, it doesn't matter what they're talking about. And I think sometimes even if someone is more hated, it makes them more likely, because also you're putting it out into the universe that this, I don't want this guy to win. Oh, guess what's happening?
Yeah. Well, that's it, because with either love or hate, they become one of the most talked about people on the planet. I don't know if there's a certain thing in the UK where maybe there's a lot of young people, males, that are angry about what's happening in their country. Maybe and some things may be an actual real reason to be angry. Some of it will have been amped up by maybe certain groups, certain pages, certain people on social media to make them think certain things. But when you have problems with like youth unemployment, you have difficulties in seeming to like get ahead, it's more difficult now than it ever has been to find like a partner or something like that. I think you get quite a lot of young men that are angry. Nigel Farage says, okay, well, the problem is it's immigration and it's this and it's this, and I can fix that for you. And it's not unfounded concerns in some ways. There was a dictionary, and its word of the year this year was "enshittification," which is like the gradual decline and shitifying of either people or a place. And I think everything for UK or uh, a couple of countries in Europe, everything's getting worse. And in just every kind of way, just in terms of services, infrastructure, job opportunities, and that thing where you have house prices going up massively and wages going up a little bit. And so that gap is just widening all the way. And so I can see why you'd have so many angry young men that might support Farage.
So in some ways, is that almost saying that with social media, it is possible to create social reform, social action, people trying to change things faster than it ever was previously? And as much as it's like all of the important topics in the world, they always end up being a double-edged sword, right? So like you could use social media to become really extreme, go down a crazy route, watch videos of girls dancing, not guilty, watch cat videos, you name it, right? Just all the crap challenges, people like doing all that stupid stuff. And you could go all that way, or you could use it to start finding communities of people that are striving to change and having a wider reach within those. And is it more about then how we use it and how much we use it than it is about social media itself being bad and being dopamine and control driven? Because actually, from what we've talked about today, of course, these big, massive companies like Facebook and the actual owners of these social media networks are making a lot of money. But are governments and big corporations actually benefiting from social media very much? And is it more smaller level people that are getting more out of it, if that makes sense?
I mean, I guess when you look at Zuckerberg, etc., they're clearly making a lot of money by having those platforms. The platforms are incredible technology in some ways, that it's like you can get in touch with anyone or have the opportunity to, whether they want to answer your DMs, maybe not. But it's like old friends. You can find them really easily. It's not like the old days looking through a phone book and going, oh, or whatever else. So it's incredible like that. As we've seen, people are benefiting in all kinds of ways. So with Twitter files, where just before the previous election, where it was Biden, Trump, and all the stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop completely silenced shortly before the election. If that story, and so you couldn't share it. You couldn't share it from Twitter to Facebook or any social media. It was just shut down. And that was seemingly to do with coming from the US government and CIA. And so it's like, I don't know if that swung the election, but it certainly had an impact. It's like to influence elections like that by actually closing people's ability to see information.
Yeah, and you could argue that's what's been done this time with Elon Musk and Trump and whatever else. But at least it was a bit more of an even battle, because if you go back to the power of some of these companies and the last election, I think I'd have to look it up to see the exact number, but Zuckerberg was putting billions and billions of dollars into Biden's campaign previously.
Yeah.
And the same way that this time, obviously, Elon Musk has been putting billions and billions into Trump's campaign. And I know that we've got a future episode where we're going to talk about Elon Musk, because we obviously both are fascinated by the guy and have opinions in all directions of what it could and couldn't be. I think it's important we make clear to our audience right now as well that we are the kind of people that will explore all kinds of ideas and not necessarily be set on there being a right or a wrong answer to anything, although we might have an opinion on that thing at the particular time. If people meet in person, they have these conversations and they learn other perspectives and other ideas and are able to learn to admit when they're wrong.
Yeah, completely. And I think also through these conversations, it's not necessarily that we're going to come to some conclusion about certain topics. Is this good or bad? Well, I don't know. But it'll be a way to discuss things and gain extra perspective.
Totally. So moving it back to the agenda slightly, one of the things we talked about in terms of social media is how hard it is for us as adults to control our usage. Like I admitted earlier on that I take my phone to the toilet, which I won't be doing anymore because you made me feel guilty. Probably not. Maybe sometimes. But for us, it's already difficult enough to avoid that stimulus, right? What about for children? So just some statistics, again, some interesting things here. Children exposed to screens show less development in their brain, particularly around language and executive functioning. The increased dopamine they get from social media likes changes their reward pathways, which again can lead to addiction-like behaviors, which could even mean the traditional vices are more of a thing or things like cocaine, which there is an absolute pandemic for in Western nations at the moment. And I think if we probably looked at who drinks and smokes, it's less. Who takes cocaine? It's probably more, I would say, in the UK now.
Quite possibly.
And then you've got the fact that the online market for advertising in these platforms is worth $616 billion. And companies are vying to get these young users' attention, because the same with cigarette companies in the past, right? You get the young smokers hooked on your brand and they'll smoke your brand till the day they die. And it's the same with these brands and social media. So my question is this: how do you feel it's impacting children and the younger people in our society that social media is so prevalent?
I guess it will be in so many different kinds of ways. I mean, I heard something interesting the other day, which is like one really small example of how it rewires the brain is we now write with our thumbs. We've never done that before in history. In other ways, with learning, for sure, one of the most important things when you're learning things is to have good sleep. Using screens, smartphones, social media especially, it's going to make you have a worse night's sleep than if you weren't using it, because you have things like the blue light coming from it. So it's almost like in your mind, you're going into all these different worlds. In the old days, we'd wake up, we were in our hut, something like that, go outside, it's forest, see some friends, I'll have a walk, an hour later, you're doing this, and your environment doesn't really change. What social media does, it's like every time, every next thing that comes onto that screen, it's like changing the environment that you're in. And so it's this like really high, bang, 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 just like stimulation going off all the time. So when you're scrolling through this thing and it's before bedtime, it's like your brain going bang, and it's like almost with the blue light to in the afternoon, I should be hunting and catching stuff. And then also my environment's changing and your brain's wired. And that's not how you get a good night's sleep. The sleep, it's like that, is it neuroplasticity and things like that. And it's when what we've been learning as well just gets cemented in. And so I can see how it would affect learning, intelligence, all kinds of development.
Yeah, and I mean, sleeping for kids is so important. I've got two children. I've got a 7-year-old and a son that's not even 2 yet. He's coming up to 1.5. And we used to be quite open and free with times with my daughter and let her watch things on YouTube and Cocomelon and all of these things that now turn out to be absolutely mind-rotting for children and totally messing up everything about their kind of dopamine levels and increasing levels of ADHD in children and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And now my daughter is not allowed to watch the TV unless it's the weekend at all.
Whoa.
Period.
Is this tied into your bullying thing, or is this just
yeah, it's part of it. Yeah. So that she's not relevant to all of her friends at school.
Everywhere.
Yeah, because believe it or not, a lot of her friends at school already have mobile phones and TikTok and access to these apps.
I can imagine.
At 7, which is...
It's insane.
And actually, the toy shops I went to the other day, there was toys that are aimed and marketed at 7-year-olds about Squid Games, which is the Korean TV show where people are literally trying to survive getting murdered in some Saw-esque warehouse with games where there's a few hundred of them and only a couple of them get out and they die in the most brutal ways. And also,
I think it should be mandatory that over the age of 5, well, you should be exposed to this.
Cancel school. Let's just have a Squid Games and then population problem solved. We can see who's got like the higher levels of IQ going through. There's a bit of luck and chance. Problem solved. So anyway, a lot of this is being driven by that, and my daughter can watch TV at the weekends, but when she does, it's feature length films, right? So she can watch Harry Potter, or she can watch Toy Story, or which again have their own level of psychological, we used to watch Tom and Jerry as kids, and what do? They kick the shit out of each other all the time, right? Thomas, I think for me, it's something that really needs to be controlled in children, because I see when my daughter used to watch stuff and I catch her watching kids breaking toys and stuff, then she wants to break toys. Or you catch kids testing out all these different things and slime and stuff, then she wants to go and do that. Because their brains are so malleable at that stage that you need to be really careful what you're exposing them to.
Even at those kinds of ages, when kids learn a language, they learn it without an accent.
Whereas a lot of the kids that are here, so obviously where we live, there's a lot of children that they have one Southeast Asian parent and one Western parent, right? And most of the kids that are from the UK, or their dad's from the UK, or or Australia, for example, they all have American accents. And the reason they have American accents is because the babysitting method that their parents use whenever they go for a meal, whenever they go anywhere that they need to quieten the child, they get out the iPad or they get out the mobile phone and they load up Cocomelon and they put it in front of them, right? And now when me and my wife go for a meal, people almost look at us because we have our son who's like nearly 18 months, Leo, and he doesn't watch phones. So sometimes he goes fucking mental. And he's sat in his chair crying, wants to get out, wants to walk around and explore and do stuff. And it means that our meals are less enjoyable when we go out. In fact, sometimes we're like, is it even worth it if we don't time it right around his nap or this or whatever? But I would rather that 10 times than just vegging him in front of the phone, which I'll be honest, I used to do with my daughter. Like that's what we used to do. So I can see it.
It's just like a modern day pacifier, isn't it? It's just, oh, here you go. Crack on with YouTube. Just go on the internet. Search for anything that you want in the world.
Yeah, and you mix that with AI. I heard a story recently where there was this kid in the United States who was talking to one of these AI apps that was pretending to be, I've not watched it, but the woman in Game of Thrones, the one that everyone, I think is it Scarlett Johansson or someone, one of these big actresses that's like really famous, beautiful, whatever. I don't think it is Scarlett Johansson, but anyway, regardless, whoever it is, she's like the princess, whatever. And this AI is designed to pretend to be her. So this kid's having conversation with it back and forth like it's a chatbot. And then the kid starts talking about like wanting to be with her and missing her so much. And eventually the boy that was doing this killed himself. Right?
Insane.
Which is just, again, if there wasn't this whole world of it being so much better in social media, even though it's artificial, and people were out and about in classrooms like we were when we were kids, banter, joking around. Sure, school was harsh when we were young, man. People would be doing all kinds of crazy stuff to each other, but it was in the physical realm that most people could deal with relatively well. There was bullying, but it wasn't the same as even what I've just mentioned there. And I feel like that with AI offering these hyper-personalized content streams in the future, and experts also predicting that we're going to be in this world where there's like a metaverse addiction. I'm concerned, particularly with those with maybe a lower mental ability, of what's going to happen in the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
And that ability to separate reality from the metaverse of a social media verse or whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, this is it. And when it gets towards like metaverse and things like that, it's like, what do we have like 5 years down the line? the people just put on a headset, go into this virtual world. It's a cross between a video game and social media, but everything's like hyper realistic and you can do anything that you want, look how you want. Everything's whatever you choose it to be.
For some people,
just going back to the Matrix, isn't it? It's like,
yeah. And I mean, for some people, that will be preferable to their own reality that they've created. But the irony of it is you can probably create that reality yourself by taking the actions that you need to take in this world and moving towards those things in this world. So I think it's really interesting. And I think there's a lot of talk about regulation. Like I know in China, they ban under 18s to 40 minutes of TikTok a day. I know there is campaigns for awareness, like the Wait Till 8th pledge, where you don't give children access to smartphones until they're in the 8th grade, which I'll certainly be following with both of my children. I said to my daughter she can have a phone, but it's a Nokia 3310 with Snake on it, like back in the day, like what we had.
Have like an old-fashioned flip phone, and if you need to call anyone, you can call them, you can send a text message, you can play a silly game, and there's a calculator on it. Okay, off you go.
Exactly, yeah. So I think there's that, but at the same time, it's like smoking and bringing it back to smoking and alcohol. It's like the same with that, right? There's all this money spent every year by governments to try and stop people smoking and drinking and doing all of these things that they don't want them to do. But you're talking £5-6 million a year, and they're making 8, 9, 10 billion in tax just in the UK from these industries.
Yeah.
So if they're making that from social media, and social media are backing even presidents' campaigns, and I'm sure even in the UK with our political system working differently, there's still social media involved in backing the parties that are in control in the UK.
Definitely.
Are they really going to be interested in limiting usage of social media to children?
I think what usually happens is the government goes, okay, well, we have to be seen to be doing something. So they'll come out with something. So there'll be maybe some case where a company gets prosecuted, but it's just one out of like 100 different companies that are doing the same thing, because maybe they're quite happy. They need to balance the books and bring in back money from tax. And also it's like, yeah, how much governments are working with social media. I know there's different government departments in the UK are designed for that.
I don't know if you've ever seen a film that's called Thank You for Smoking, but it's an awesome film. So I'd recommend watching it to anybody that hasn't seen it. But it's about these 3 friends, and one of them is a tobacco lobbyist, one of them is an alcohol lobbyist, and the other one is a firearms lobbyist in America. And they meet up and talk about, how they're working with the governments to try and push certain agendas about what they're doing. And it's a really interesting film. So certainly we will have that with social media and social media companies. I just profit a little bit off the teat of people's making money from what they do in social media. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. And I think that kind of brings us nicely to a conclusion. I don't know if you've got anything else that you'd like to add to our first session of Deranged Ramblings.
No, I don't think I have much, really. Scrolling, it's kind of like, it's like mental chewing gum, because it's like chewing gum, you're chewing away, but there's no nutrition, there's no benefit to it. And scrolling through social media, it's just the same thing.
Yeah, and it's ironic because chewing gum was actually brought out with the advertisement of it helping you to relax. But what it does is it encourages you to grind your teeth. So if you ever watch anybody chewing gum, do they look relaxed? Unless they've that is definitely an episode for another day.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd say as well, we know that social media has this effect on the dopamine system. And so it's like getting those likes and those hits and things like that. It is sparking up the dopamine response, a little bit like doing a tiny little bit of cocaine or something like that. And if it's similar in those kinds of ways, I mean, I don't know your parenting style, but if I was a parent, I wouldn't give my kids cocaine. And for the same reason, I wouldn't give my kid a smartphone and access to Instagram until their brain was more developed.
It's like when we were that age and in our teenage years, the kids we knew that started maybe experimenting with things a little bit too early tended to be the ones that perhaps didn't develop it as far as others. So I think that is a solid message. Don't give your children cocaine or smartphones. Would
Yeah, even if
be
you can just do one of the two, you're doing something.
you're doing well. So
responsible.
that's the conclusion of today's call. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Adam, Mr. Garcia, for joining us. If you've enjoyed listening to our exploration of the dopamine dilemma today here on Temporally Scripted, don't forget to like, subscribe, send it to a couple of your mates that you don't like, or obviously that you do like, that might get some entertainment and some value for this. And we'll be back on your screens and in your ears next week with another episode. But thanks for joining us today.
Okay. Be well, everybody.